Company owner hires private investigator to follow employee. When he tells her what he discovered, she is desperate. At 6:45 a.m., Victoria was already in the conference room. She sipped her coffee while observing one by one the nervous managers entering the room. Some tried to hide their exhaustion, others their fear. By 6:55 a.m., all 15 managers were present, all except Richard Miller, head of the Northern Division. 7 o'clock, announced Victoria, standing up with her folder of reports. Does anyone know where Mr. Miller is? The silence was uncomfortable. Finally, a junior manager, Tessa Carter, timidly raised her hand. Ms. Winters, Richard is at the hospital. His daughter had an asthma attack in the middle of the night. Victoria's face showed no emotion. I understand. Unfortunately, the rules are clear. Amanda, arrange for Mr. Miller's replacement by the end of the day. Tessa's eyes widened. But ma'am, he's been with the company for 15 years. His daughter is only 6 and... Decision made, interrupted Victoria, opening the reports. Now let's get to what matters. The numbers from the last quarter are unacceptable. The meeting continued for 2 hours. At the end, everyone left with heads down, with new and even more aggressive targets, feeling as if their jobs were hanging by a thread. Victoria returned to her office satisfied. She firmly believed that pressure generated results. That's how. Her father had raised her. That's how she conducted her life and her business. By evening, after a long workday, Victoria decided to do something unusual, stop by the cafeteria before going home. She rarely frequented that space, usually reserved for operational staff. She wanted to see with her own eyes how the environment was after the announcement of Richard's dismissal. The cafeteria was almost empty at that hour, except for some night shift employees. Among them, a man of approximately 40 years caught her attention. He was alone in a corner, apparently focused on his meal, but Victoria noticed something strange. He discreetly took some bread and fruit and stored them in a lunchbox. Victoria knew that face. It was Michael Thompson, one of the longest-serving employees in operations. Always punctual, never absent, worked overtime without complaint. A model employee, at least on paper. So why was he taking food from the company? Instead of confronting him directly, Victoria retreated to the hallway and observed. She watched as Michael carefully closed the lunchbox, cleaned the table, and left hurriedly, looking around as if afraid of being seen. Even the most trustworthy can surprise you, thought Victoria with a twinge of disappointment. She waited until the next day and during lunch called Mark Collins, a private investigator who had done work for the company before. I want complete information on an employee. Michael Thompson, Operations Department, 42 years old. Especially, I want to know what he does after work hours. A week later, Victoria received investigator Mark in her office, a discreet and efficient man who had become her confidant over the years. He had provided services to Winters Enterprises. So? Asked Victoria impatiently, while pouring herself a cup of coffee. Did you discover why one of my best-paid operations employees is stealing food from the company? Dear viewers, our story is just beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow the development of this plot that will stir your emotions. Leave your like and let's continue. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ms. Winters, I believe you'll be surprised by what I discovered about Michael Thompson. I'm listening, said Victoria, sitting behind her imposing desk. To start with, Michael isn't just an operations employee. I consulted the company's old records and discovered that he started here almost 20 years ago in the finance department. Victoria frowned. Impossible, I would remember. It was before you took over as president. During your father's time, Michael was considered very promising with a degree in economics from Harvard and a specialization in corporate finance. And how did he end up in operations? Victoria's curiosity was genuinely awakened. Mark took a folder from his briefcase. In 2008, there was an error in a financial report that cost the company approximately $200,000. Michael took responsibility, although there are indications that the real culprit was the then financial director, Edward Martin, who ended up leaving the company shortly after for a better position elsewhere. Victoria took the folder and began examining the documents. Your father, Ms. Winters, was a strict man. Instead of firing Michael, he demoted him to operations with a significant salary reduction. It seems it was an exemplary punishment to show that mistakes would not be tolerated. My father was always fair, Victoria defended automatically, without a doubt. Instead of pressing the button for the 40th floor where her office was, she impulsively pressed the button for the basement, where operations was located. She rarely went to that area. The noise of machinery, the heat, the accelerated pace, none of that was part of her executive world. Upon entering the vast warehouse, several employees momentarily stopped what they were doing, surprised by the president's presence. Victoria walked slowly between the workstations. She noticed the wear on some employees' uniforms, the fatigue etched on many faces, the tension in the air. When she reached the final assembly section, she spotted Michael. He was concentrated, assembling a complex structure with impressive speed and precision. For a moment, Victoria just observed. She saw how he discreetly guided a younger colleague without interrupting his own work. She saw the natural leadership, the dignity with which he performed tasks far below his original training. She was about to approach when her phone rang. It was Amanda, her assistant. Ms. Winters, the Japanese ambassador, just arrived for the 3 p.m. meeting. Are you on your way? Victoria looked at her watch, surprised. She had lost track of time. I'm coming up now. Before leaving, she cast one last look at Michael. Something was changing inside her, a restlessness she hadn't experienced in a long time. That night, Victoria did something she hadn't done in years. She left work early. At 7 p.m., to the amazement of her team, she announced she was going home. In truth, she didn't go to her penthouse apartment in the Gold Coast. She asked her driver to take her to an address in the far south side of Chicago. Are you sure, ma'am? Asked the driver, clearly concerned as he entered the simple neighborhood. Absolutely. And you can go. I'll call a rideshare when I want to return. But ma'am, it's fine, I know someone here. It was a half-truth. Victoria was on Michael's street, information obtained through Mark's report. Standing at the corner, she observed when he arrived around 11:30 p.m. exactly as described in the report. She watched him enter a small house with low walls painted faded blue. She saw the lights turn on and through the window could make out silhouettes, probably the children greeting their father. She felt strangely invasive, almost voyeuristic. What was she doing there? Why had this specific employee affected her so much? She decided to leave, but something made her stop. Michael's front door opened again and he came out, accompanied by his oldest daughter. Both carried trash bags which they deposited in the street bin. Victoria partially hid behind a tree. "Dad, you need to rest. You're working too much," said the teenager, in a concerned tone that reached Victoria's ears. "I'm fine, Anna, don't worry." "You say that every day, but I see how your hands shake from exhaustion and that cough that won't go away." "It's just a persistent cold. It'll get better," the girl hugged her father. "I got a part-time job at the neighborhood pharmacy. I start next week." "No, Anna, we've already talked about this. You need to focus on your studies. The SATs are coming up." "But Dad, we need the money. Grandma needs that new medicine, and you said Matthew needs new glasses." "I'll figure it out. I always do, right?" Michael smiled, running his hand through his daughter's hair. "Now go inside, it's getting cold." When both returned inside, Victoria remained motionless for several minutes. A knot formed in her throat. She called a rideshare and, during this entire journey back to her luxurious apartment, didn't say a word. Upon arriving home, instead of reviewing reports as she did every night, Victoria went to her study and opened a rarely accessed cabinet. From there, she retrieved an old box containing belongings of her father, who had passed away 6 years ago. Among photos and documents, she found a diary. She knew of its existence, but had never been interested in reading it. Tonight would be different. She poured herself a glass of wine and began reading the memoirs of Arthur Winters, the man who had founded the company and shaped her worldview. The first pages were predictable: business accounts, strategies, achievements. But as she advanced in her reading, Victoria began to find more personal reflections, especially from the last years of her father's life. "Today I turned 65, said an entry from 2016. "I look at everything I've built with pride, but also with a growing sense of emptiness. I created an empire, but at what cost? I lost my wife's love, watched my daughter become an even harder version of myself, and now I wonder, was it worth it?" Victoria stopped reading, stunned. She had never imagined that her father had such doubts. He had always seemed so confident, so resolute in his decisions. She continued reading and found an entry. That left her breathless. "The Michael Thompson case haunts me to this day. But what happened afterward was that Michael never managed to return to the administrative sector, even with exemplary evaluations. The company's progression system, especially after you took over, made it practically impossible for someone from operations to be promoted to management positions." Victoria closed the folder, visibly uncomfortable. "This explains why he's in operations, not why he's taking food from the company." Mark took a deep breath. "That brings me to the most interesting part of the investigation. I followed Michael for a week. Every day he follows the same pattern. Leaves work at 10 p.m., takes 2 buses and gets home around 11:30 p.m. in a simple neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. Continue. He lives in a modest house with 5 people, 3 children, Anna, 17, Matthew, 12, and Sophie, 8, and his mother, Mrs. Eleanor, 78, who suffers from advanced stage Alzheimer's. And his wife? Gone, said Mark, carefully choosing his words. According to neighbors, Sarah Thompson abandoned the family about 3 years ago, when her mother-in-law's illness began to worsen. Apparently, she moved to the West Coast with another man. Victoria leaned back in her chair, absorbing the information. "The food he takes from the company is for his children, Ms. Winters, specifically for their school lunch the following day. Despite the salary he receives, Michael faces serious financial difficulties. How is that possible? Even in operations, we pay above market average." "That's true, but he has exceptional expenses. His mother needs constant care, expensive medications, and adult diapers. The company's health plan doesn't cover all the necessary treatments. Additionally, he pays tuition for all 3 children. Private school. With his financial situation? They're not elite schools, Ms. Winters. They're modest institutions, but Michael refuses to take them out. He seems to consider their education an absolute priority." Victoria stood up and went to the window. Outside, Chicago pulsed, indifferent to small everyday tragedies. "There's one more thing," said Mark. "Michael works double shifts 3 times a week to supplement his income. That explains why he's always the first to volunteer for overtime. And why hasn't he asked for help? We have assistance programs in the company." Mark gave a sad smile. "According to conversations I overheard, he tried 3 times in the last 2 years. The requests were denied by the HR department for not fitting the established criteria. Apparently, because he earns above a certain amount, he technically doesn't qualify for additional aid, regardless of his family situation." Victoria returned to her desk. "Thank you, Mark. That's all for now." When she was alone, Victoria opened the folder with Michael's information again. There was something about that story that deeply troubled her, but she couldn't identify exactly what. In the following days, Victoria couldn't get Michael out of her head. During a meeting with the board of directors, she discreetly asked an assistant to bring her the productivity records from Michael's department. "As you can see, gentlemen, the last quarter showed a 7% drop in global billing," the CFO, Paul Richardson, was saying while pointing to charts projected on the screen. Victoria observed the numbers, but her mind was on the sheets she had just received. Michael's department was one of the few that maintained constant productivity, even with staff reductions. And right at the top of the efficiency list was his. Name, Michael Thompson. "Ms. Winters, do you agree with the proposal?" Victoria turned her attention back to the meeting, realizing that everyone was looking at her, waiting for an answer. "Repeat the question, please." Paul Richardson seemed surprised by Victoria's unusual inattention. "We're proposing an additional 15% cut in the operations payroll to compensate for the drop in revenue. This would mean eliminating approximately 200 positions, mainly at the Chicago plant." Victoria hesitated, also unusual. "I want to analyze these numbers more carefully. Let's postpone this decision until the next meeting. The directors exchanged confused looks. They had never seen Victoria Winters postpone a cost-cutting decision. After the meeting, Paul approached her in the hallway. "Victoria, is everything okay? You never hesitate with staff cuts. It's been our policy from the beginning, results first, people second." "I'm just being cautious, Paul. I want to ensure these cuts don't affect sectors that are still producing well." Paul laughed skeptically. "Since when does that matter? You've always said everyone is replaceable." That phrase, which she herself had repeated countless times over the years, now sounded strangely cold to her ears. "Things change, Paul. Sometimes we need to re-evaluate our strategies." Leaving the director visibly confused, Victoria headed for the elevator. "I was unfair and knew it the moment I made the decision. Edward was truly responsible for the error, but I protected him because he was my longtime friend. I sacrificed a brilliant young man's career to save face. This is just one of the many regrets I carry." Victoria closed the diary, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her father, her model, her hero, had doubts, regrets, ethical failings he had never revealed. That night, Victoria barely slept. For the first time in years, she questioned everything: her beliefs, her decisions, the empire she commanded with an iron fist. And mainly, she questioned the person she had become. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the company later than usual. Her dark circles didn't go unnoticed by Amanda. "Are you okay, ma'am? Can I bring you a coffee?" "I'm fine. Amanda, I need you to bring me some information. I want the last 6 months' pay stubs for all operations employees, organized by salary range." "All of them? That's over 200 employees, Ms. Winters. All of them. And I also want a survey of all benefits denied by HR in the last 2 years, with detailed reasons." Amanda made notes, visibly surprised. "Anything else?" "Yes. Schedule a meeting for tomorrow with the Human Resources Director and the company's social assistance team. And don't put it on my official calendar. I want total discretion." Throughout the day, Victoria received the requested documents and immersed herself in analysis. What she discovered shocked her. Despite the company's high profits, the wage inequality was glaring. While she and other directors received million-dollar bonuses, many operational employees could barely cover their basic expenses with the salary they received. Even more disturbing, Winters Enterprises' social assistance program, originally created to help employees in vulnerable situations, had been gradually emptied. The criteria for receiving aid had become so rigid that less than 5% of applicants were approved. In the midst of her investigation, Victoria found Michael Thompson's complete file. She confirmed everything Mark had reported, but discovered more. Since being demoted, Michael had requested a transfer to the administrative sector 17 times. All denied, most without justification. His requests for aid for his mother's medical treatment were also systematically refused. When it was time for the HR meeting, Victoria was prepared. Martha Green, the department director, entered the room accompanied by Joseph Roberts, social assistance coordinator. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, "I want to understand how a social assistance program approves less than 5% of requests when it was created to serve at least 30% of employees in need." Martha seemed uncomfortable. "Ms. Winters, we're just following the established guidelines. The company policy has always been clear. Financial results come first." "And who established these current guidelines?" Martha hesitated. "Well, the board, with your approval, of course. In 2018, when we needed to cut costs, Mr. Richardson proposed restricting the criteria, and you approved." Victoria felt a weight in her stomach. She vaguely remembered that meeting. At the time, she was focused on achieving aggressive targets to impress shareholders. "And what about Michael Thompson's specific case? Why were all his requests denied?" Joseph, visibly nervous, consulted a folder. "Technically, his salary is above the limit for family medical assistance. And regarding transfers, there's an unofficial policy by there. Well, what unofficial policy?" Victoria's voice was sharp. "Employees who have been demoted for serious errors cannot be relocated to administrative functions." It was It was guidance we received years ago. From whom? Joseph looked at Martha, who intervened. From Mr. Richardson. He said they were your instructions, that you wanted to maintain discipline and show that errors have lasting consequences. Victoria felt anger growing inside her. Anger at Paul, but mainly at herself, for having allowed the company to become that bureaucratic and inhumane monster. I want a complete review of all social assistance and career progression policies. As of today, these absurd criteria are suspended, and I want an immediate reassessment of Michael Thompson's case. Martha looked confused. Ms. Winters, this goes against everything we've built in recent years. The shareholders will have to understand that a company doesn't sustain itself by exploiting its employees to exhaustion. We're losing talent, Martha. People are getting sick, giving up, producing less. Don't you see that our model is bankrupt? After the meeting, Victoria was exhausted but determined. She knew she would face resistance, especially from Paul Richardson and other directors who profited from the current system. But something had changed inside her, a certainty that the path she had taken until now was wrong. At the end of the day, she called for Mark again. I need more information, she said as soon as he entered her office. I want to know which directors and managers would most resist a profound change in our management model. Are you planning a restructuring? I'm planning a revolution, Mark. And I need to know who will be with me and who will be against me. The news spread quickly. Victoria Winters was asking unusual questions, requesting strange reports, questioning long-established practices. The corridors of Winters Enterprises buzzed with speculation. Paul Richardson met secretly with 4 other directors at the exclusive Chicago club. She's out of control, he said, between sips of expensive whiskey. Yesterday she suspended all planned staff cuts, and today she asked for a detailed report on the salary difference between upper management and the factory floor. Must be some strategy for the next shareholders' meeting, suggested Claude Morrison. Commercial director. You know how calculating she is. Not this time, something's different. She even cancelled Richard Miller's dismissal, that manager who missed the meeting because of his sick daughter. Impossible. Victoria never goes back on a decision. Well, she did, and yesterday I saw her going down to operations, alone. The directors exchanged concerned looks. They had known Victoria for years and knew her current behavior was completely atypical. We need to act before she does something drastic, concluded Paul. Our priority is to protect our interests. If she's really planning significant structural changes, will be the first affected. While the directors conspired, Victoria continued her private investigation. After a week of intense analysis, she had a clear picture of the situation. Winters Enterprises had become a machine for generating profits for shareholders and bonuses for executives at the expense of thousands of employees' well-being. Even more disturbing was realizing her own role in this system. The cruelest policies bore her signature. The most inhumane decisions had her endorsement. She wasn't just an accomplice, she was the principal architect of that perverse model. On a rainy Friday afternoon, Victoria did something unthinkable. She went personally to operations to look for Michael. She found him operating a complex machine with the same concentration and efficiency as always. Mr. Thompson, she called, surprising him. Could you come with me, please? Michael followed her, visibly tense. Colleagues observed, whispering among themselves. Being personally called by the president was rarely a good sign. Victoria led him to a small meeting room on the same floor, away from curious ears. Relax. It's nothing negative, she said, noting his nervousness. Actually, I want to ask you some questions about your experience at the company. Michael nodded, cautious. How can I help, Ms. Winters? How long have you been working here? 19 years and 7 months, ma'am. And you started in the finance department, correct? Michael's eyes widened slightly. Yes, ma'am, as a junior financial analyst. And now you've been here in operations? For how many years? 11 years, ma'am. Victoria observed him for a moment. Despite his simple work clothes, Michael maintained impressive dignity. Straight posture, firm gaze, calm voice. He didn't seem like someone defeated by life, despite all the difficulties. Michael, I'll be direct. I know you were unfairly punished for an error you didn't commit. I also know about your family situation, your sick mother, your 3 children, the financial difficulties. He paled. Ma'am, You don't need to explain. I'm not here to judge or punish you. On the contrary. Victoria took a deep breath. I'm here to apologize to you. The words hung in the air, heavy, unexpected. Michael seemed unable to believe what he was hearing. Apologize? For allowing this unfair system to persist, for turning my back on people like you, who give everything to the company and receive crumbs in return, and especially for not having questioned the decision to keep you trapped in this position for so many years. Michael remained silent, processing those surprising words. I want to hear from you, Michael. How can we improve? What's wrong with Winters Enterprises? Be completely honest. I promise there will be no reprisals. For a moment it seemed he wouldn't respond. Then, slowly, he began to speak. He told her about the rigid system that prevented any internal mobility, about supervisors who treated employees like disposable machines, about working conditions that worsened each year while profits increased, about colleagues who became physically and mentally ill due to constant pressure. He spoke for almost an hour, and Victoria listened to every word, taking notes, occasionally asking questions. When he finished, both remained silent for a few moments. Thank you for your honesty, Michael. This will change, I promise. Before he could respond, the door to the room opened abruptly. It was Paul Richardson, accompanied by 2 security guards. What's happening here? He asked with a forced smile. I looked for you everywhere, Victoria. We have that meeting with the Canadian investors, remember? Victoria stood up. I cancelled that meeting, Paul, and I don't remember asking for your presence here. Paul's smile disappeared. We need to talk, Victoria, in private. Any issue can be discussed in Mr. Thompson's presence. He is now my special consultant for organizational restructuring. Paul laughed, incredulous. A factory worker, as a consultant. Have you lost your mind? No, Paul. For the first time in a long time, I think I've found it. Victoria turned to Michael. Please, return to your department. Tomorrow we'll continue. Have a conversation, and thank you again. When Michael left, Paul closed the door forcefully. What the hell are you doing, Victoria? First you cancel the cuts, then suspend the planned dismissals, and now you're fraternizing with factory workers. I'm correcting mistakes, Paul. Mistakes we've made for years. Mistakes? This is how we built this company. This is how we reached the top. And now you want to throw it all away because of, what? A belated crisis of conscience. Victoria faced him coldly. Did you know about Michael Thompson? Did you know he was unfairly blamed for an error he didn't commit? Paul looked away. That was more than 10 years ago. What matters now? It matters because we've built a company based on lies and injustices, Paul. And that ends now. The financial director gave a dry laugh. You can't do this alone, Victoria. The board will never approve radical changes. The shareholders will be furious. Think carefully about what you're doing. I have thought, and if you're not with me on this journey, you'd better be ready to get out of the way. Paul stared at her for a long moment. You'll regret this. We built this empire together and you're about to destroy it. When Paul left, slamming the door, Victoria knew she had made a powerful enemy. But she also knew there was no turning back. The transformation that had begun inside her now needed to spread throughout the company. The weekend was one of intense preparation. Victoria worked incessantly in her apartment, analyzing documents, planning strategies, developing a comprehensive action plan to transform Winters Enterprises. Sunday night, she received an unexpected call from Tessa Carter, the young manager who had defended Richard Miller in the meeting. Ms. Winters, forgive me for bothering you on a Sunday, but I thought you should know. There are rumors that Paul Richardson is coordinating with some shareholders to call an extraordinary board meeting. It seems they want to, well, remove you from the presidency. Victoria wasn't surprised. She knew Paul well enough to know he wouldn't easily accept the changes she planned. Thank you for the warning, Tessa, and don't worry, I'm prepared for this battle. In fact, Victoria was more prepared than Paul imagined. During the weekend, she had spoken with her mother, Claire Winters, who still held 30% of the company's shares. Claire, who had always kept her distance from the business after separating from Arthur, was initially shocked by her daughter's revelations about the company's practices. After a long conversation, she agreed to support her. Victoria also contacted Mark, who brought her valuable information about alliances and vulnerabilities within the board. With this information, she developed a strategy to neutralize Paul's threat. On Monday, she arrived at the company determined. Her first action was to call an emergency meeting with all employees, something never before done in the history of Winters Enterprises. At 10 a.m., the huge auditorium was packed, administrative staff, managers, and representatives from operations, all waiting anxiously. Paul Richardson and his allies observed from a corner, visibly tense. Victoria took the stage without elaborate presentations, without the usual corporate paraphernalia. Just her, a microphone, and the truth she needed to share. Good morning, everyone. I thank each one of you for your presence. Today I won't speak as president, but as someone who, like you, is part of this company. The silence was absolute. No one had ever heard Victoria Winters speak that way. For years, we've conducted Winters Enterprises following a model we believed was the only path to success: maximum pressure, results at any cost, human sacrifice in the name of profits. She paused, looking at the attentive faces. I was wrong. We all were. A murmur ran through the auditorium. We built a financially solid company, but humanly bankrupt. We created an environment where fear replaced respect, where exhaustion is confused with dedication, where justice and compassion are seen as weaknesses. Paul Richardson moved uncomfortably in his seat. Recently, I had the opportunity to see our reality through the eyes of people like you. I saw parents working to exhaustion to support their families, while we at the top accumulated obscene bonuses. I saw extraordinary talent suffocated by a rigid and punitive system. I saw human beings reduced to numbers on spreadsheets. Victoria took a deep breath. I know many of you don't trust me, and you have good reasons for that. I was an active part in creating this system. I signed policies that harmed many of you. I ignored pleas for help. I prioritized profits over people. For all this, I sincerely apologize. The auditorium remained in stunned silence. But words are not enough. That's why today I announce a radical transformation plan for Winters Enterprises, a plan that is already being implemented. Victoria then detailed the changes: complete revision of the salary structure to reduce inequality, creation of a robust medical and social assistance program, implementation of a fair career progression system, reduction of working hours without salary decrease, participation of employee representatives in strategic decisions. I know these changes will meet resistance, especially among those who benefit from the current system. I also know that some shareholders may oppose, fearful for their short-term profits. To these I say, a truly sustainable company is one that thrives along with its employees, not at their expense. Paul Richardson abruptly stood up and left the auditorium, followed by some allies. Victoria continued unfazed. To ensure these changes are implemented fairly and effectively, I'm creating a special restructuring committee. This committee will be formed by representatives from all hierarchical levels, including operations. She paused and looked at a specific point in the audience. And I would like to announce that Michael Thompson will be the coordinator of this committee. His unique experience, having worked in both finance and operations, perfectly qualifies him for this role. A buzz ran through the auditorium. In the back, Michael looked stunned. I know these changes will generate uncertainties and doubts. I don't have all the answers, and we will certainly make mistakes along the way. But I prefer to err trying to build something better than to succeed perpetuating injustice. Victoria concluded her speech with a promise. From today on, Winters Enterprises will not be measured solely by its profits, but by the dignity and well-being of each person who contributes to its success. This is my commitment to all of you. When she finished, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then slowly someone began to applaud. The applause spread, growing in intensity until it transformed into a standing ovation. As she left the stage, Victoria knew the real battle was just beginning. Paul Richardson wouldn't give up easily, and the more conservative shareholders would certainly resist the changes. But something fundamental had changed inside her, and now inside the company too. The reaction to Victoria's speech was immediate and polarized. While most employees celebrated the announced changes, the company's upper echelon was divided. Some executives, mainly the younger ones, supported the new vision. Others, led by Paul Richardson, saw the changes as a direct threat to their privileges. In the following days, the tension was palpable in the corporate corridors. Victoria began implementing the first changes. She called Michael for a formal meeting and made his new position official with a salary compatible with the responsibility. She authorized the immediate review of all cases of employees who had requested assistance and had their requests denied. She established a commission to evaluate cases of injustice similar to Michael's. Paul Richardson, meanwhile, wasn't idle. As Tessa had warned, he called an extraordinary board meeting to discuss Victoria's erratic behavior and her reckless plan that threatened the company's financial stability. On the morning of the board meeting, Victoria entered the room knowing she would face her most difficult battle. The 12 board members were already present, including Paul Richardson, who smiled with excessive confidence. "Gentlemen, I appreciate everyone's presence," Victoria began. "I understand the concern with the changes I announced, and I'm here to clarify any doubts." Paul was the first to speak. "Victoria, we all respect your leadership over the years, but we need to seriously discuss the financial impact of these ideas. Our analysts estimate that the announced measures would reduce the company's profit by up to 30% in the first year." Other board members expressed similar concerns. Tension grew in the room. "Gentlemen," Victoria responded calmly, "you're looking at only one side of the equation. It's true that some of these measures will have a significant initial cost, but have you considered the cost we're already paying for the current model?" She then presented data carefully compiled over the week: the alarming increase in staff turnover in recent years, the growth in recruitment and training expenses for new employees, the increase in absenteeism due to health problems, the constant decline in customer satisfaction indices. "Our productivity has been declining for 3 consecutive years, gentlemen, not because our employees don't try hard enough, but because they are exhausted, demotivated, and sick. We continue to demand more while offering less. This model is bankrupt." The room fell silent. Victoria continued, now with more confidence. "The changes I propose are not just morally right, they are strategically necessary. Companies with progressive human resources policies have consistently demonstrated better long-term performance. Lower turnover, higher productivity, better market reputation." One of the oldest board members, Edward Mitchell, intervened. "Your arguments are interesting, Victoria, but how can we be sure these changes will bring the expected results? The risk is considerable. Nothing in business life is guaranteed, Edward, but we have concrete examples of companies that made similar transitions with great success. Additionally," Victoria made a strategic pause, "I have here the formal support of shareholders representing 43% of the company's capital, including my mother, Claire Winters." Paul Richardson visibly paled. He hadn't expected Victoria to have mobilized so much support. "Even so," he insisted, "we need formal board approval for structural changes of this magnitude, and I doubt we have consensus here today." Victoria smiled serenely. "You're absolutely right, Paul. That's why I'm not asking for approval for all changes at once. I'm proposing a 6-month test period for the priority initiatives. At the end of that period, we'll present concrete results for the board's evaluation." The proposal was too reasonable to be refused without seeming obstinate. After 2 hours of intense debate, the board approved the test period, with the condition that any measure showing significant negative financial impact would be immediately reviewed. As she left the room, Victoria found Paul in the hallway. "You won this round, Victoria, but 6 months pass quickly, and I doubt you'll be able to show positive results in that time frame." "This isn't about winning or losing, Paul. If you could see beyond the quarterly numbers, you'd understand that we can all win together. The company, the employees, even the shareholders." "Poetic," he mocked. "But this isn't a novel, it's the real world of business, and in the real world what matters are concrete results." "On that we agree," responded Victoria. and that's exactly what I intend to deliver. The following months were of intense work. Victoria, with support from Michael and the newly formed restructuring team, implemented the first changes: salary adjustments for lower-income employees, flexible hours, creation of a comprehensive medical and psychological assistance program, and complete revision of the evaluation and promotion system. Paul Richardson and his allies observed attentively, waiting for failure, ready to take back control at the first opportunity. Occasionally, they planted bureaucratic obstacles or spread negative rumors, trying to undermine employee confidence in the new initiatives. At home, Victoria continued reading her father's diary. She discovered a complex man who in his final years had profoundly questioned his life choices and the empire he had built. In a particularly touching entry, Arthur had written, "True legacy isn't in the buildings we construct or the money we accumulate, but in the lives we impact. I fear my impact has been more negative than positive." Those words resonated strongly with Victoria. She was determined not to repeat her father's regrets. 3 months after the changes began, the first results started to appear. Absenteeism had dropped 15%. Internal surveys showed significant increase in employee satisfaction, and surprisingly, productivity in some sectors was already showing slight growth. But there were also problems. Implementing the new policies required significant investments, pressuring the company's cash flow. Some conservative clients, influenced by rumors about a supposed internal crisis, began to review contracts, and several high-ranking executives, dissatisfied with the reduction in their bonuses, left the company to work with competitors. Paul Richardson took advantage of each difficulty to sow doubts among board members and shareholders. "It's just the beginning of the collapse," he would say in private meetings. "Winters Enterprises is losing its identity, its strength. Soon we'll see the true damage of this disastrous experiment." The 4th month was the most difficult. Unexpected problems arose. A major account was lost to a competitor. A new system, implemented to improve working conditions in operations, experienced technical failures. And a preliminary financial report showed an 18% drop in profitability. To aggravate the situation, a major newspaper published an article titled "The Decline of an Empire," detailing Winters Enterprises' problems and insinuating that the company was heading for bankruptcy under Victoria's new idealistic and naive management. That night, Victoria arrived home exhausted, with the feeling that perhaps Paul was right. Maybe her ideas were good in theory, but impractical in the real business world. Maybe she was destroying her father's legacy instead of correcting it. As she considered giving up and reversing some changes, her phone rang. It was Michael. "Ms. Winters, forgive me for calling at this hour, but I thought you should know. The operations employees are organizing something for tomorrow. I tried to dissuade them, but—" "What is it, Michael? A strike? A protest?" Victoria's heart raced. "No, ma'am. It's a show of support. They heard about the newspaper article and want to demonstrate that they're with you. They're even willing to accept a temporary salary reduction if it helps the company get through this difficult period." Victoria was silent, fighting against the tears that unexpectedly welled in her eyes. "Miss Winters? Is everything okay?" "Yes, Michael. Everything's fine. Better than it's been in a long time." The next day, when Victoria arrived at the company, she was greeted by hundreds of employees applauding in the main lobby. Many carried signs with messages of support. It was a spontaneous, genuine demonstration, something no amount of money could buy. Among the crowd, she saw familiar and unknown faces. She saw Richard Miller, the manager she had almost fired for taking care of his sick daughter. She saw Tessa Carter, who had risked her position to alert her about Paul's maneuvers. She saw newly hired young people and veterans who had been with the company since her father's time, all united by a common purpose. And in the front row she saw Michael, accompanied by his 3 children, Anna, Matthew, and Sophie, all wearing T-shirts with the company logo. That spontaneous demonstration was a turning point. The press, which had reported the problems, now covered the unprecedented show of employee support. Clients who had hesitated made contact, impressed with the demonstrated loyalty. And within the company, a new sense of unity and purpose began to flourish. In the following weeks, Victoria intensified her work, now with renewed confidence. With suggestions from the employees themselves, she implemented adjustments that made the new policies more efficient and less costly. She created direct communication channels between different hierarchical levels, eliminating unnecessary bureaucracies. She encouraged innovation and collaboration through recognition programs based not just on individual results, but on contributions to the collective good. Gradually, the financial situation began to stabilize. Productivity, which already showed signs of improvement, increased significantly. The organizational climate, once toxic, transformed into an environment of mutual respect and cooperation. Employees who had left the company began to request returns. When the time came for the final presentation to the board, upon completing the 6-month test period, Victoria was prepared. The numbers still weren't spectacular. Profitability remained below the previous period, but the trend was clearly positive. More importantly, all long-term sustainability indicators showed substantial improvement. "Gentlemen," she concluded, after the detailed presentation, "what we've done in these 6 months is just the beginning of a profound transformation. We still have much work ahead, many adjustments to make, many challenges to overcome, but the path we've chosen is irreversible." Paul Richardson, who had watched the presentation in somber silence, finally spoke. "Impressive, Victoria. I must admit, you achieved better results than I expected, but we're still talking about lower profits, reduced bonuses, dissatisfied shareholders. Is this a sustainable model for a publicly traded company?" "A valid question, Paul," responded Victoria. "And the answer is, it depends on what we understand by sustainability. If we think only about the next quarter, perhaps not. But if we consider the long-term future, 3, 5, 10 years, I firmly believe yes." She then presented projections for the coming years, showing how increased productivity, reduced turnover, and improved quality of products and services would gradually overcome the initial costs of the changes. "More importantly," she continued, "we're building a truly sustainable company in the broadest sense of the word. A company where people want to work, with which clients want to associate, in which investors can believe not just for immediate profits, but for the positive impact we generate." The board deliberated for 2 hours. In the end, by a narrow margin, 7 votes to 5, they approved the continuation and expansion of the transformation program. Paul Richardson, defeated, announced his departure from the company the following day. 1 year after the beginning of the changes, Winters Enterprises was a profoundly transformed company. The hierarchical structure had been remodeled, becoming more horizontal and collaborative. The remuneration system was redesigned to drastically reduce internal inequality. Well-being and professional development programs became priorities. The EU results exceeded the most optimistic expectations. Productivity increased 23%, turnover fell to less than half, customer satisfaction reached record levels, and, surprisingly for many, profit began to grow again, already approaching previous levels. Michael Thompson, now Director of Human and Organizational Development, led many of the initiatives. His unique experience, having lived both at the top and bottom of the corporate pyramid, gave him an invaluable perspective. On a sunny spring afternoon, Victoria called him for a conversation in her office. "1 year, Michael. Sometimes it seems like it was yesterday that I saw you taking food from the cafeteria." He smiled, now at ease in her presence. "And sometimes it seems like it happened in another life. How are your children and your mother?" "All well. Mrs. Eleanor is getting the best care now, thanks to the new assistance program. Anna was accepted to medical school. Matthew is doing well in school, and Sophie..." He laughed. "Sophie says she wants to be a company president, just like Aunt Victoria." Victoria smiled, genuinely touched. "It would have been so easy for you to hate me, Michael. After everything you went through, I'm not one to hold grudges, Ms. Winters. Besides, few would have the courage you had to acknowledge mistakes and change so profoundly not just yourself, but an entire organization." Victoria looked out the window at the city stretching to the horizon. "You know what surprised me most in this journey? discovering that doing the right thing can also be profitable. Not immediately, not without effort, but in the long run, creating a more humane company is also creating a stronger company. Michael nodded. My father used to say, profit is like oxygen, necessary for life, but not life's purpose. Wise. Your father. He was a bricklayer. He worked on the construction of one of Winter's first buildings, did you know? He used to say he put more than bricks in that structure. He put his dreams of a better future for his children. Victoria felt a lump in her throat. How many stories like that existed in the foundations of the company she had inherited? How many dreams, sacrifices, hopes? Michael, I'm planning something new. I want to create a foundation linked to the company, focused on education and professional development for youth from underprivileged communities. I'd like you to lead this project. His eyes shone. It would be an honor, Ms. Winters. Please, after everything we've been through, I think you can call me Victoria. He smiled, nodding. It would be an honor, Victoria. When Michael left, Victoria remained by the window for a long time. She thought about her father, about his late regrets, about the chance she had to correct mistakes before it was too late. She thought about Paul Richardson and others who couldn't see beyond the next quarterly report. She thought about all the Michaels out there, talented, dignified, resilient people, just waiting for a fair opportunity. And she thought mainly about the company she now led. No longer a cold, profit-generating mechanism, but a living community of people working together with purpose and dignity. The sun was setting on the Chicago horizon, casting a golden light over the city. Victoria Winters smiled. The future, for the first time in a long time, seemed truly promising. The end. Dear viewers, we hope that Victoria and Michael's story has touched your hearts. If you enjoyed this tale of transformation and overcoming, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the American corporate world. Don't miss our upcoming content. Share your opinion about this story in the comments.